Welcome to the Innovative Accountant Podcast, presented by Integrated Advisory. Join your host, CPA Tim Coquell, as he explores thought-provoking ideas, information, and best practices from leading experts focused on supporting the accounting profession and the integrated advisory community. Here's your host, Tim Coquell.
Welcome back to the Innovative Accountant Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Coquell, and I'm excited to have our guest, Karen Bowen, join us from Kelowna, BC today. Welcome to the podcast, Karen.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Yeah, I bet, we met probably a couple of months ago, and I bet that when we met on a plane coming from Kelowna to Calgary that you didn't think you'd be sitting in a podcast with me here today.
You are indeed correct.
Yeah. I always find, in life, if you kind of stay open to meeting new people and opportunities, you kind of get surprised with some unique things that happen. So it was a pleasure to meet you. Getting to know you even on the plane, I could tell you were so relaxed, easy to talk to, high level of emotional intelligence, which is the theme of today. We're going to be talking about emotional intelligence and leadership in businesses. And we've got the absolute perfect guest with Karen here today for our audience that's listening. Lots of experience helping businesses and coaching them with EI, EQ, training programs, and we're going to dig into a lot of great questions here today. We're going to answer some questions that, what is emotional intelligence compared to, say, IQ, other things? What does emotionally intelligent leadership look like? How is a person's emotional intelligence measured, tracked? Is emotional intelligence innate? Can it be taught? I'm hopeful that it can be, Karen, because I need a little help in some of those areas, as we all do. How does emotionally intelligent leadership or lack thereof impact an organization? So I think that's probably going to be one of the key takeaways is why is this so important for leaders in a business to get this right? And what can businesses do to support the growth in those areas? And obviously you've had a ton of experience in that regard. So you think we can tackle that today, Karen?
Yeah, I'm ready to rock.
Ready to
Let's
go?
see how we get through this. Yeah.
Awesome. So maybe we'll just start with, you've had, a 25 plus year of experience in this area, from leadership consultant, specializing in emotional intelligence. How did you get involved in this business? Let's maybe go back to the beginning. Tell us how your career's kind of evolved and why you're here today as a specialist in that area.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, it's funny because I get asked this question often, and my answer often is, I tried to quit this field a few times and it kept finding me. I grew up in financial services, worked in back office of banks, payroll, and said, no, then got into training and found my passion with working with people and developing them, and started as a technical trainer. Decided it's not what I want to do. And then I found myself back in the role, did some writing, and really the common themes throughout my career, I kept coming back to, I keep just these roles or opportunities find me where I have an opportunity to connect with people and learn with people. So I don't know that I had a path that I saw my steps, but I knew when I was on the path, and I knew I had the right path. Supplemented that with formal education, a couple of undergrad degrees, and I have a master's in leadership as well. And really, the list of certifications I say that you would probably expect someone to have. I find now if I list them, I just feel old rather than wise, because I think I've just been alive a while to collect all these certifications. But it's definitely been a field that's been a constant focus and fascination for me, for really not just in career, but in life as well.
Yeah. Well, going through your bio, obviously no shortage of experience and training there, but EI is an interesting one, right? So there's lots of things in your bio and your resume that show experience in consulting and coaching and leadership. But what drew you to sort of specialize in emotional intelligence?
Well, it really was, I think. Again, it's such a foundational aspect of everything for me: leadership, management, people skills, life skills, self-care skills. Like, I just find the broad application and relevance of emotional intelligence, the aspects of training, the development was applicable across all areas of life, career, work, family. So it just really was an area that no matter what I was talking about, there was always an element. You know, if I'm teaching communication skills, there's an element of EI or emotional intelligence. I'm teaching conflict, well, you have to have EI to be, you know, the most effective. Resilience is an emotional intelligence skill. Like everything I found myself continuously talking about had these such strong links into emotional intelligence as well. So it kind of made sense to have that as a focus. And then with all the, like if you're picture a wagon wheel, you know, the center is the emotional intelligence, and then the spokes are the other skills of leadership and management and life that are applicable.
Yeah, we're going to get into how that's evolved, because I'm assuming when you started at the beginning of your career, there might not been a lot of research in that, and it wasn't maybe the testing systems and things maybe weren't quite what they are today.
Yeah.
We'll get there in a moment. But I want to let's come back. So flashing forward to where you are today, you're a senior partner of EQ, the EQ Development Group. Talk to me about how you founded that, your team, and what they're up to today.
Yeah, well, I mean, very super blessed to be able to, you know, have formed this amazing organization with an amazing team. So it's myself and my business partner. We founded it together. His name is Drew Bird. And, you know, he was really my mentor and my master trainer in emotional intelligence. So we worked together many, many years. I was developing my business. He was developing his. And then we realized really just before the pandemic hit that, you know, as we both got busier, we were connecting less rather than more. And we had an epiphany that if we come together, I think we can build something great as a partnership. So we incorporated EQ Development Group at that time.
Yeah, very exciting. And so the team consists of you, and I know you're traveling, you're working. We met on a plane. You seem to be all over the place and meeting with lots of different types of clients. So maybe talk a little bit about that. What types of businesses do you work with, and leadership groups do you work with? And then we can get into a little bit of what services you're providing to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the reasons we really appreciate emotional intelligence, back to that broader application, is we do have some natural niches in businesses and industries that have emerged throughout our career, likely linked to our organizational acumen in different areas. So we do a lot of work in healthcare. I do a lot of work with physicians and clinical and administrative teams in healthcare. We're solidly in academia, secondary level, post secondary level academia. We do a ton of work into municipalities as well. And, you know, having said that, then we also do the one-ofs. We work with smaller companies, because really emotional intelligence doesn't belong to an industry. It belongs to any industry. So people say, what industry do you specialize in? And I'm like, all of them. With those, of course, those niches emerging. IT, tech industry is another one that, based on our background, both Drew and I, you know, grew up in our careers in the technological aspect of industry as well. So, you know, healthcare, academia, municipality, industries, I say, would be our four main. But we really work with just such a broad array of companies that
and small companies up to large. Like I think some of the companies you worked with have had thousands of people. And
because
so
I mean, really,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we need emotional intelligence. We're a company of, you know, 5 with our and that broader with our coaches and consultants we partner with, up to 25,000. You all need emotional intelligence. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, basically, and that was what I was just going to say too, is basically any company that has teams that need to work together, and people need to work together to accomplish things. It's applicable to pretty much everything. So that's fantastic. I did note, looking through your bio, you know, obviously this is the Innovative Accountant podcast. We've got a lot of accounting community listeners in our network, and I did note that you'd worked with Crowe Mackay, and we've had some discussions with them in the last year or so, and obviously a large accounting organization in Canada and around the world for that matter. tell me a little bit about what that was like working with an accounting group and kind of how you fit into their story.
Yeah. Well, without giving away trade secrets
Yeah.
and violating client
Yeah.
confidentiality, of course, it was in the realm of EQ. We talked about EQ, we talked about resilience. I was given the opportunity via another colleague, so I was extremely grateful for that. And, it was a fun room. Like I actually quite liked it. Full disclosure, my mother's an accountant, my husband's an
Yeah.
accountant, so maybe I have an affinity for it as well.
Yeah.
Definitely not skill, but affinity.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I really appreciate the analytical lens of I want to understand the importance of the why, but the
Mm.
what was also appreciated.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
Good.
enjoy that. I like it when people challenge the concepts and say, but let's
Yeah.
get to the practical. What does this mean? Like, this is all good, but what am I supposed to do tomorrow?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
it was
that's
great.
refreshing to hear. There's often some accounting
Hmm.
stereotypes that float around. I actually think accountants are pretty highly emotional intelligent, but always curious to see how that goes. And
Yeah.
obviously building resilient organizations is really, really important.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess wrapping a bit of this up, what would you consider the unique value of working with your company um, for the businesses that are choosing you? Like what's that sort of unique ability you guys have?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think the biggest thing, so our vision, we recently walked through our own strategic planning process, and our vision at EQ Development Group is trusted partners, positive impact. And I really think that is our defining factor as well. We are about relationship with our clients, we're collaborative, and we hold ourselves to such a high standard of quality. We want to blow our clients away in every interaction, not just meet the bare minimum requirements. We do
Hmm.
not pre bill unless it's agreement with the client. We invoice when you're happy and when we consider that that piece might be complete, but the partnership continues. So most of our business, if not all, is built on repeat and referral. That's how we've
Right.
grown over the last 10 years between us. And I think that speaks for itself. Is we want to be easy to work with. Our only goal and our only interest is what works and what's going to provide the most value to our clients.
No, that's perfect. I did, and not a surprising answer that you're kind of teaching them how to build better relationships with emotional intelligence, and you're in the
Yeah.
relationship business yourself. So that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Let's jump in and let's talk. We hear a lot these days about EI, EQ. Some would
Mm-hmm.
suggest they're trendy buzzwords,
Mm-hmm.
for organizations and leadership today. How do you respond to that? Where do you think this fits?
Yeah. Yeah, the fluffy stuff, right? Oh, one of these fluffy seminars. Uh, but there is a hard ROI. So often when we run a workshop, we open it up with, think of your gold standard of leadership. Envision a leader that positively impacted you in your career or life and name some of the characteristics. And what we see as characteristics are they were supportive. I trusted them. They believed in me. They positively reinforced me. I felt valued. We had a good relationship. Those are the adjectives, and they were empathetic, they were compassionate. These are the adjectives that come up. We don't get things like, well, they had my timesheet submitted on time. So when we
Hmm.
open with that activity, it's like these are all aspects of leadership that allow you to build that connectivity with your team and their soft skills and
Right.
their emotional intelligence. Each one of them can be mapped across some of the aspects of emotional intelligence. It is absolutely critical for leadership. And you don't always know when someone has it, but you know when someone doesn't.
Well, and most people know that a lot of people leave companies because of their manager who they report to, right? So
Most.
a lot of that is
Yeah.
going to be tied to what you just said. If they're doing the
Hmm.
exact opposite of everything you said, chances are they're
Hmm.
not going to be happy people.
Yeah. Well, and you leave your manager, not your organization. And if you really connect with your leader, there's something called discretionary effort, right? And this is the effort that as team members and employees we put in that's over and above. We do that for leaders we like.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that
Exactly.
for leaders we dislike.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is really important. And so let's define this a little bit. Like we've got IQ, we've got AQ. I think I heard that term talking to you. We have
Yeah.
PQ, which is positive intelligence. We've got
Yes.
emotional intelligence. So there's all these pieces of a person that we're trying to measure and analyze. How do you define in your company, how do you define emotional intelligence and EQ as it relates to leadership? What's your definition of that?
Well, really, the definition we use with our clients is it's the set of skills that allow you to, again, we're not interested in, high, low, good, bad. We're interested in effectiveness. So how do you be the most effective you can be at a leader? And emotional intelligence as related to leadership is the ability or the effectiveness to which you use your understanding of emotional information, such as self-awareness, how you express yourself, how you build relationships, how you manage stress, how you cope, and how you make decisions. All of these are critical aspects of leadership, and they're directly tied with understanding and ability to be effective in your emotional intelligence around those areas.
No, that's a perfect summary and kind of making it concise about how they're interacting, making decisions, managing stress, all of those things. So with that definition in mind, how has that evolved? You've been at this a while. What has that evolved as a specialty? Has the testing changed a lot over the years? Is it kind of what it was the same 10 years ago? Has it evolved a lot? How do we measure it? How do we track it? Just kind of talk a little bit about what that looks like today.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's obviously multiple emotional intelligence assessments, which is the measurement of EI, which is your EQ. Just like cognitive intelligence is measured by IQ, emotional intelligence is measured by your EQ. There's a myriad of assessments on the market. Goldman is a pioneer in the area of emotional intelligence. There is a version there. There's new ones emerging. We specifically use from multi-health systems, we use the EQI and the EQ 360 model of emotional intelligence. It has undergone, again, multiple iterations. It is a level B psychometric test, which what that means is it's rigorously researched. It's proven validity and reliability in its results. And to be able to use the assessments, you have to take a minimum number of learning hours and pass an exam with a minimal level to be able to state that I can work with clients on this assessment. So it's very rigorous. And again, in terms of research, it's valid, it's reliable, and it's a reliable measurement of your emotional intelligence. Now, the key is it measure, and most assessments, I won't get into the other ones, but emotional intelligence is a state-based measure, which means it doesn't necessarily rate my ability to be emotionally intelligent. The assessments we use rate my emotional intelligence in that given moment, if that makes any sense. So if I'm going through a life crisis, I may show up differently than
it can change.
Not. So it's called a state-based measure.
Okay. And so then obviously the importance of being able to measure that throughout your life or over time as a leader in a company, and how you're sort of you're getting better and dealing with it.
You can develop.
Because the goal's got to be, I'm guessing, that you want to be able to, no matter what your state is, you're going to do a better job responding to the environment.
Or learn coping mechanisms, and through your own understanding of self and how you interact and connect with others. And for instance, just learning about how emotions impact decision making allows me to be a more effective decision maker.
Right.
Whereas before, if I didn't know that, I may not even have realized I was making an emotional decision versus an effective decision.
Right.
In which takes into account emotions.
Can you give me an example of that? Can you give me an example of how a certain emotion affects maybe and leads to bad? I think we all have examples, but in the workplace and in a leadership capacity, maybe share an example just to put it into context.
Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes you might look at objective data and say, okay, pro con list, right? There's more pros, so we do it. And you make a decision based on that, and it's not adopted because you haven't accounted for the emotional piece of how that decision might impact people. So this
Right.
is that sometimes that you relate it to change management. You know, the change is the change. It was this way. It's now going to be this way. It's a transition piece of, well, it just makes sense. Why aren't people doing this?
Right.
Because there's an emotional aspect of all of this. So understanding that, you know, how are people going to be impacted? How do emotions impact how I make decision making? I know for me personally, I had an experience where I won't get into it, but it was a situation where I recognized in the moment that the pressure was being put on me, and the desire was that I was fearful. So that I would, you know, sign the dotted line because I was in this fearful position. And so just understanding that knowledge in the moment allowed me to say, I understand. Thank you for the information. I recognize that I'm fearful in this moment, and I'm not going to be able to make an effective decision. So I'm not going to sign today.
Right. Right. That makes sense. That's a great example. Let's go back to the testing a little bit here and talk about, you know, because I don't think I've done a lot of different testing from Colby to Print to Clifton Strength Finders, all these different, whether it's Myers-Briggs or, so you've talked about the 360 and the tools you do. I'm curious, like, what does that test look like? Like, what kind of questions are you asking?
Okay.
How do you actually test that with somebody? Are you giving them sort of examples of things and they got to see, and you see how they respond to it, or like, how do you get to the bottom of that? Is it them self-assessing themselves? Is it groups, other people? Walk me through that.
It's a great question, and we work in all of those other ones, by the way, that you mentioned. Depending on the client and their needs, but we actually call the EQI and the EQ 360, the tool we use, an assessment, not a test, because it isn't about testing your levels of EQI. It's a self-assessment. So it is yourself. And it's funny how many clients forget this. You know, they'll get the results and be like, why did I score so low? And I'm like, well, that was you that scored yourself that way, right? Because the second we say test, it creates this vulnerability and anxiety that can sometimes get in the way. So it is literally 144, we call them items, not questions, just to, again, stay away from the test realm. 144 items. And what it's asking you to do across 144 items is to kind of say, this is most like me, least like me. So it may give you a scenario, you know, I'm not pulling the actual assessment items here, but, you know, I find myself I find my decisions derailed by the emotions I might feel. That's not one of the items, but I might say a lot like me, not like me at all.
Right.
It also has built in questions that specifically rate happiness, so your general well-being. And it also has, because of the validity and reliability, it has items that are only in there just to make sure you're not like overly negative or overly positive, and that you're consistent in your answers. Meaning that, you know, if you said, Karen, are you happy all the time? And I said, always. And then you said, you have sad days? And I said, always. It would be like, wait, that doesn't compute.
Yeah, it's going to catch it.
Yeah. So it has those checks and balances built in, but it is a 144 item self-assessment. If you do a 360, it would be your perspective, and then you would ask other people to rate you across the same 144 item assessment. So I can see, like, my self-assessment is how I think I show up. My rater assessment is how I actually show up, according to their version of me anyway.
Yeah, super interesting. It's a lot different than, you know, doing an assessment, and it's like you're a quick start with Colby, and so you adapt quickly to things, or you're a fact find and you like data. Like people hearing that and learning those things, it's not overly personal. It's, you know, they can kind of, you know, process it, I think, pretty quickly. But how does EI go? Like, I'm assuming you're getting into some sensitive personal areas of how people react to the world and whether they get angry or they overreact or do things like that. How are the tests received? Like on the end, and when you go and sit down with leaders and you got to go back through whether it's their self-assessment or more challenging yet, how a group sees them, if there's blind spots, like these got to be tricky areas. So just share some of your experience with that.
Yeah, thank you. So the model we use, you get your self-assessed emotional intelligence rated across 5 general areas, which we call composites. So it's self-perception, how do I see myself? Self-expression, how do I express myself? Interpersonal, which is how I build relationships. Decision-making, you know, how I make decisions, and my stress management. Then within each one of those, I won't go through all these, don't worry, there's 3. So you actually get a rating or a self-assessment score across 15 different aspects of emotional intelligence. It can be a very vulnerable examination. Again, some people get really attached to the scores. I was low, I was high, and you have to remind it's not really about the score, it's about how things interact and balance.
So you have to manage their emotional intelligence when you deliver it.
Yeah, you really do. So we do a couple of specific things to protect people. If we're working with a team, we actually very intentionally do not ask anyone to share results. So if you've done Myers-Briggs, and I do it, so it's not a criticism, I think it's fun, but you kind of do that. Everybody's going to agree to share, right? And then you sort into groups, and I'm a J and I'm an I and all this stuff. Well, for emotional intelligence, we say very specifically, please do not share. Because even if you're comfortable in sharing, it can create a dynamic where other people feel like they should. And our only, again, goal is to have people be comfortable in the environment where they can learn and gain value, as well as doing some honest self-examination.
Yeah. And I would assume that with EI and the testing that there are quite a few blind spots that people have. And I would expect that especially shows up when you're doing the 360.
Yes.
Is that fairly common?
Yeah. In fact, when you do the 360, the report you get has a 4-quadrant graph, and it shows you which areas are blind spots. Meaning, I rated myself one way, and my raters rated me very differently. Now, that might have been higher or low, we don't know, but all we know is like, wham, there's 5 areas where you and your raters disagreed. So you're looking for ideally high alignment of agreement. And if there's disagreement or misalignment, those are often the areas which clients want to explore first.
Yeah, makes sense. So what, when in working with teams like you have for so many years, what are some of the common gaps that you see? Like, what are the top few sort of gaps that come out when you do these 360 assessments? Give us a few examples of that.
Oh, that's a good one. Often it would be empathy. That's one of the 15 subscales I mentioned. People will be surprised by a result in empathy. And again, this shows up in leadership. Assertiveness is another area. Now, what's important to recognize that it's not bad to be high in assertiveness and high in empathy. It's when they're out of balance. Meaning that if, let's say, I was low in empathy and high in assertiveness and they were out of balance, that means that when I deliver my ideas, I'm not considering how other people might feel when they're receiving them.
Makes sense.
So it's good to be high assertive, but I got to bring my empathy up. Like, how am I interacting with people? Yeah. Problem solving is another one that can show up sometimes. Stress, especially as we navigated pandemic and post-pandemic. Stress management, stress tolerance, optimism, and flexibility. These are some of the subscales that I'm seeing suffering. It's almost the second pandemic of burnout.
So somebody might think they're handling stress well and they're good at it, and others see the results of it and they're like, no. So you're having
Like I
those
might be
types of
like, oh,
conversations. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, in both ways, Tim. Like I might be like,
Yeah.
I'm great. I'm calm, cool, and collected. But you have to remember that sometimes if I'm too calm, cool, and collected, my team will be like, are you even human? And
Yeah,
I
you're
lose
not
that
real
connection.
yeah.
So it's not about high-low. It's about balance and impact. Like that's really where the powerful conversations have.
Yeah.
And it's not about the score on the report always.
Right. Well, the score is just the score, right? We got it. What are we going to do with it to improve the score?
Exactly.
Is really the value of any type of consulting or planning. So
exactly.
Let's talk about that. I'm kind of sold that I think EI is probably one of the biggest indicators of workplace success and performance. I mean, you can be smart and good at you need the skills and you need the whole package, but I got to think that EI in a workplace environment is probably one of the largest contributors to somebody's career success. Would you agree? Obviously, that's why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, again, there's so many aspects tied into emotional intelligence. So I do a lot of research in the realm of happiness, for example. And there's a direct correlation between my levels of emotional intelligence and my levels of happiness. Now, the new research around, say, happiness in the workplace is happy team members are productive, they're inspiring to others, they're more effective in their work, and there's more engagement, there's more value, people are staying. So these are like hard ROI results of happiness, which is directly impacted by your level of emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Completely. So I want to come back. You'd mentioned some categories, but I just want to capture them a little succinctly here. So what aspects of EI do you think are most critical for success as an employee or a leader? So I think you touched on those, but let's just go back to them. What do you see as the sort of critical emotional intelligence pieces that lead to success in an organization?
Oh, that's a tough question because I'm kind of like all of them if they're out of balance.
Yeah.
But if backed into a corner, and this is really just my opinion at this point, I think it's an ability to have an emotional self-awareness of what's going on for me. How might that impact others? There's another one that is interpersonal relationships, and that's my ability to build relationships that are characterized by trust and compassion. I think that's critical for leadership. Empathy, and then of course really the ability to delay and impulse control and make effective decision making through problem solving that takes account into emotions. And I think for me in stress management, if I had to select one of those, it would be the optimism, right? That it might be tough right now, but we will get through this. And there's a reality of it, but we will get through.
Yeah, that's kind of like another book I read on positive intelligence. They talk about the PQ and how you relate to the world positively or not, and how that really affects things. So that's helpful. IQ, you hear about these tests. You're kind of born, you got high IQ. Where does EQ set from your perspective? Is it innate? Like I'm assuming there's people you meet and they just get it. And then there's others that don't get it. How easy is this to teach? How much of it is innate in you or how much is it environmental affected? Do you have a sense of that just from the research and things you've looked at?
Yeah, I mean, so EQ is completely developable. Do I meet people where they seem like they're more naturally emotionally intelligent? Absolutely. Do I meet people that had said, oh, I've done so much training and I'm so emotionally intelligent? And you're like, really? That's not really what I'm seeing. Yes, of course you do. But it is developable. I think in terms of how easy is it, that's directly linked to your willingness to honestly explore where you're at, identify goals that are meaningful for you, and we give people, like, here's 10 things you can do to develop empathy. They're very concrete. What is your commitment level and willingness to put the work in?
Right.
Because I also believe that, anyone can run a marathon, but are you willing to do the training?
Right.
You're
Yeah.
not just going to take a running workshop and then be able to run a marathon the next day. You got to put the work in.
Right. So your desire to change and self-improve and be self-aware and all those things are part of EI as
100%.
well. But so you've got the assessment, you've unpacked it with the person. You what's next? Like, so how in your process, how do you take that then and turn that into meaningful action for people so that they can see those benefits?
Well, whether it's one-on-one coaching or team workshops where we're using this, it concludes with concrete action planning of what we called micro resolutions, meaning doable, concrete. If you want to use the SMART objective, we say smarter, and the ER is engaging and rewarding, as well as specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely. But it really is, sometimes we use what we call a 1, 2, 3. What is one thing you can do twice a day for 3 weeks? Or, what are 3 things that you can do for 2 weeks to develop one area of emotional intelligence? But we really get into concrete actions. We give worksheets that, how do you build empathy? Well, can you pause the next time you're buying a gift for someone and really give some intent to what they might like? Oh, I can do that. Well, that will develop your empathy. It's, very concrete. It's not airy-fairy. And in team workshops, it's kind of a requirement. We carve out quite a bit at the end of the day to do the action planning. And then in coaching, of course, it's more of an ongoing process. So you're going to set goals, check in, measure progress against them in collaboration with the client.
No, that's perfect. And so let's talk a little bit about that with organizations. So you go into some organizations that maybe aren't big enough to have their own internal group like this, or they're large, and I'm assuming you're going in and you're helping coach them, and then you're kind of stepping away. And is that more common than the regular ongoing training that you provide? Like, where do you lean towards as a company?
I think it's a both and. Like, I don't know that because we really do both. We do a lot of assessment-based leadership programs. Like, a company might say, I have 10 leaders. I want to do EQ 360s with all of them. Okay. So we do an assessment, and then, each leader gets like 3 to 8 coaching sessions, depending on the structure of the contract. We also have, for example, a one-day workshop. It's called the Emotionally Effective Leader. You get an assessment. You come together in a one-day workshop. We talk about areas of leadership potential, like how you're really going to reach your leadership potential. We talk about areas that will derail your leadership, not a maybe. They will if you're low in these areas. And then, of course, the action planning. We have a 2-day workshop, which we call it the Emotionally Intelligent Organization, where we incorporate emotional intelligence assessments with a workshop simulation of why organizational life goes the way it goes, what are the toxic patterns, and how can you start to address those and do things differently that foster a more positive culture. So those are just some of the areas, and I really think, Tim, it's a both and. I don't think we dominantly work in one area.
Okay. So you'll go in pretty flexibly. You'll either work with, so if an individual leader, maybe his company didn't want to do an assessment, but that individual wanted to go and do some assessment work, you will work with people like that?
Oh, 100%, yes.
So individuals, teams, and companies where they want to do it for their entire leadership group, you'll do the assessments, step away, or you'll do the assessments and then you'll do the ongoing coaching. Do you also coach trainers? Like, do you help businesses actually get trained up or certified? Like, how does that part work in this?
Yeah, so we kind of have 3 arms of our business. The first arm would be corporate workshops, which is kind of what we were just describing. The second arm is we have an online platform as well, which has, it's called My Leadership Hub. So you can learn about just your own self-paced. It's all emotionally intelligence based. And then the third sort of line of business is supporting coaches, consultants, trainers in getting certified to, they can then go administer these EQI assessments. So we're master trainers at EQ Development Group, so we're able
perfect.
to provide certification services.
Very cool. You got it covered. Got the bases
And
covered.
we do. Yeah.
So so we've talked about, what it is. I want to get into why it's important, why it's so important in a moment, but we've talked about that. We've talked about the assessment, some of the sensitivities around that, the process in terms of how you go into our organization, go through those assessments and what you do. Let's talk about the wins that you see come from this. Like what are the biggest impacts and value that's created that you've seen in companies that have gone through and done this? Where do you see those biggest impacts? Where's the ROI?
Oh, well, I mean, I talked about discretionary effort already. Not that you do this with an intent for people to work more, but, it really generates that productivity, effective culture, engaged workplaces, and all of those things. If you look at the research, and again, this won't be news to anyone that's listening to this, how much more it costs to retain or recruit versus retain. So if you can retain and engage your current workforce rather than constantly having this turnover and the cost and expense of them recruiting, training, all of that, like that's huge. I think there's a number as well that it's like, last time I looked, I teach this in my conflict course. I'll deny everything if I misquote this, but I'll go with the number. I think it's like $380 billion is the cost of workplace conflict in the US on average per year. And if you train people and develop emotional intelligence, it turns conflict in organizations, doesn't avoid it, but it turns it creates more of a potential for it to be constructive. So what are we learning? How do we collaborate? Is there a third way? Can we be innovative? So that conflict doesn't become something toxic to avoid. It becomes something that actually propels the organization forward.
That's interesting. In looking at things again like Colby and some of these other programs, what I've found in my experience is it kind of gives an organization a bit of a language. Like as you start to learn about it and you share it more broadly with your team, people start to kind of, if there are these issues or things come back, they can go back and go, well, that's because you're a quick start, Tim, and you're chasing the squirrel. But it gives you a bit of a language to sort of deal with some of these potential issues or conflicts. Does the program you do kind of do some similar things to that? It helps people kind of, when they have those moments or those situations, they have a bit of a language on how to process it differently?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I mean, when you look at organizational culture, it's, authors like Edgar Schein would say things like, how do you build culture? It's artifacts, which might be physical things. It's common language. It's making sure that what you say is important to you is demonstrated as important to you. And all of these can be based in emotional intelligence. So how do we build these ideas together? What are our common values? So one of my favorite quotes from, a guru of organizational culture and strategy, Peter Drucker, is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if you don't pay attention to the culture, it doesn't matter how effective your strategy is.
Yeah, love that. And I think you guys do a lot of work because, again, going back through learning more about you, it sounds as though you do a lot of work on values, vision, mission. Where does that fit into all this? And how do you kind of weave EI back into all of that?
Well, really how I just described. So, Drew, my business partner, does, as I said, he's like my Yoda for emotional intelligence. So I just look up to him and he does so much work in that area. One of my niches is actually walking teams, organizations through strategic planning, where the output is a plan, but where most of the time is spent is how are we connecting? What's important to us? How are we going to navigate conflict? What are our common values? Are we aware of what's going on? Are we reality testing things? How are we going to make effective decisions as a team? All of this is before we even talk about, what are your strategic focus areas that you might want to talk about? And people say, like, we got this great strategic plan, but it felt like team building. So what's up with that?
Yeah.
So again, I think it just has to be the underlying. Am I flexible enough to open myself up to different ideas? How are we going to be resilient? How are we going to make sure that, our plan allows us to have a path, but remain nimble at the same time? All of this is connected to aspects of emotional intelligence: problem solving, flexibility, stress tolerance, optimism, like all of these things. So, I always struggle with the question because I don't know that I'm giving an articulate response, but it's so intertwined for me that it's hard for me to even separate and unpack how it's different, because it's just part of what I do.
Yeah. No, it's exciting work when you're getting into those things that are at the core of an organization, and really helping, focus on what is most important and how they're shaping values and how they want to treat people and what kind of an environment and culture they're building. That's fun stuff.
It sure is. And then where are you at now, right?
Yeah. No, that's great. I want to just thank you for sharing a lot of that with me. There's a lot of value in what you're doing in the world today and in businesses. I know we talked about maybe even getting you in to have a chat with our team, and although we're all a little bit like, okay, what's this going to mean? We're going to unfold, lift up the kimono, so to speak, and see what's happening. So we'll see how it goes here. I'm excited to take the next step with you guys and learn more about it. I always tend to close off our podcast with guests and talk a little bit about, and this is an old strategic coach habit, where we talk a little bit about books they're reading, and I always am interested in what people have that they're digesting these days. Do you have a book that you've been reading that's interesting that you'd like to share?
Well, I'm always reading a whole bunch of books, but in terms just as a resource for emotional intelligence, if I wanted to recommend one, here it is.
Perfect.
It's called The EQ Edge: Emotional Intelligence and Your Success. So we believe in this so much that if every time somebody certifies with us, we gift this.
Okay.
And
cool.
It's like, this is your go-to for emotional intelligence. So, I
Who's
could
the
list
author
another.
on it?
My apologies, Stephen Stein.
Okay.
And Howard book. Yeah.
And what's out of you going through it? What's the biggest takeaway you enjoyed out of that book?
So when I think really, as I talked about those concrete actions, because to your point, right, like this stuff seems so airy-fairy. Well, I would say that's one of our value propositions as well, is that we land the plane.
Yeah.
Like, we might fly around up here, but at the end of the day, we land the plane. Yeah. And what this book will give you is concrete strategies of what you can do in your day-to-day life to start to develop the aspects of your emotional intelligence that are important for you to develop.
Yeah.
So that's what I appreciate about it.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to have to take a read through that. I haven't read it yet, so I'm always excited when I get a new book to read. And do you know if it's available on Audible? Don't know? I'll check it out.
I don't know, but it's definitely on Amazon. So
perfect.
I would be shocked if it wasn't, but I just can't answer that question.
Yeah, all good. I'll figure it out. We'll let our audience know later. And so I guess just to wrap, Karen, if our audience wants to reach out to you, learn more, they're interested in figuring out what this means for their leadership, their company, how you can support them, what's the best way to do that?
Well, we're all over the place. Our website is www.eqdevgroup.com. Our online learning system is www.myleadershiphub.com if you're interested in self-paced learning. I can be reached at Karen@eqdevgroup.com. Always open to email as well, or info@eqdevgroup.com. So there's lots of ways to get us, and Drew is the same as well. But if you email info, that will make sure that it's directed properly, or send it to me directly and I'll make sure everybody gets sorted out.
That's perfect. I know you're generous with your time, and and you're sharing your knowledge as I experienced on the plane from Kelowna with you and getting to know you. So thank you so much for your time today, Karen, and sharing your experience with our audience. I'm certain that this is an area that many companies haven't explored deeper, and after hearing you talk about this and bringing some shape to it, and as you say, helping understand that the plane is landable.
It is.
This is an area that I think companies should be exploring more deeply, and especially in the accounting community. You know, there's lots of stress, there's lots of issues and things that go on with a cyclical business like that requires some high emotionally intelligent people to get her done. So I appreciate your time. Thank you. I look forward to maybe bumping into you again on another trip to Kelowna and spending some more time with you. So thanks again, Karen. And on that note, this ends this edition of the Innovative Accountant Podcast. I hope our listeners enjoyed it. Thanks again, Karen.
Thanks, Tim. All the best.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Innovative Accountant Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show and even learned something new. If you're interested in elevating your firm and transforming your client experience to create sustainable firm growth, get in touch with us by visiting integratedadvisory.ca to set up your free call with one of our integrated advisory experts. Visit integratedadvisory.ca today to set up your free call with an integrated advisory expert. Be sure to subscribe to the Innovative Accountant Podcast so you never miss an episode. Thanks for listening, and be sure to tune in for the next episode of the Innovative Accountant Podcast. Production of the podcast is by @Heart Creative and can be found online at @heartcreative.com.